January 26th. It is a Monday. I have a snow day, and it was snowing all weekend here, and I've just been buried in this video. I've wanted to do this video for a long time, a deep dive into my MFA, which I worked on from 2016 to 2021 through Savannah College of Art and Design. The story of my MFA really begins in 2010. I had been living and working as a photographer in New York City. It was a great decade. I think of nothing but just, amazing experiences throughout that time period. But the end of it, the last year, was a little bit of a grind, to say the least, professionally in terms of my photography. I had just become so burned out, and I hated the idea that, something I loved so much, photography, had become this really stressful thing. Heard about an opening teaching photography here in Kansas at Andover High School, which is just outside Wichita, my hometown. Andover is a school where my mom had been a counselor in the sort of mid-late 90s. And so I applied, got the job, applied in the summer of 2010, knowing that I wouldn't start until midway through that school year, so January of 2011. My wife, Yvonne, was pregnant at the time. We thought, all right, we're going to have our son in New York City, and then we'll move after that. So the last half of 2010 was kind of wrapping up New York City. In December of 2010, we moved. Julian was 10 weeks old. But yeah, I didn't just get into a classroom and start teaching. I had to sign up for classes to get my teaching certification, and that was through Emporia State University. Started teaching, started those classes, stuck with it. For a year, I got my official teaching certification classwork done, and I thought, you know what, I might as well just stick with it and get a master's out of it. So the teaching certification classes were 21 hours, and I think it was 15 more hours just to get my master's. So in December of 2013, I got my master's in secondary education, and then kind of took a break from schooling for a while. But about 2015, I thought, that was a lot of fun. I'd like to do that master's experience, but have it be all about photography. And so SCAD has an educator scholarship where you'll get half-price tuition, so it was kind of a no-brainer to do it through them. A lot of the other people that were in the program were also educators like me. But yeah, I just want to dive in and kind of talk about some of the projects. I mean, it was a ton of work, but really, still to this day, just a complete joy and just a great experience doing that for 4.5 years. So here we go. So the first step was simply applying, and it wasn't hard to pull pictures from my decade in New York City. I know that black and white street photography is probably seen as passé by the art school crowd, but I was pretty proud of the work, still am. So I included that. But by 2015, when I was applying for my MFA, I had kind of, stopped doing street photography, and I had done more experimental projects. This was a 100-year-old lens that didn't have any sort of aperture in it, so I had to use a really dark ND filter and do like 8-second exposures. I applied with that. My first class was called Photo 501, I think, and it was really a look at the history of photography, and my big project in that class was doing a look at Henri Cartier-Bresson. I thought I knew everything there was to know about him, read all the books about him, but there was plenty that I didn't know, so it was fun to pull from a really big influence of mine and put together this project. We also had to dissect a single photograph, and I chose this picture by Robert Frank. Wanted to look at the context of the picture, not only the location, but sort of the mid-50s, McCarthyism, etc. Again, I was able to find a lot, and I liked creating these sort of animations showing some of the pictures on the context sheet. I found the exact location on Canal Street, but yeah, I have shown this picture to so many classes. I think it's a real good picture that shows the hierarchy not only of race, but of gender as well. This was an assignment where we had to, quote unquote, curate an exhibition. I chose the idea of time. I've had lots of phases in my career, sharpness and emotion and composition, but time is the one that I think about the most, and so that's what this exhibition is. I did a lot of art history classes, or I shouldn't say a lot, but I did two in particular where it was nothing but papers. I wouldn't say it felt perfunctory, but it was a lot of writing. I do appreciate it kind of in hindsight. It introduced me to lots of movements in art history, namely surrealism, postmodernism, deconstructivism, etc. So lots of work doing those projects. I had a couple classes called Digital Craft, and it was very much Photoshop based. We had one where we had to show the lighting setup, so that's why I have these behind the scenes pictures of all these, makeshift studio scenes. But yeah, I enjoyed that quite a bit. I hadn't really done any kind of photography like that at all. This next project was called The Politics of Place. So I used a telescope to sort of rake through layers of infrastructure in my city. And then we had an assignment called An Investigation of Time. These were just some outtakes from clock experiments I did. I like the ND sunrise sunset pictures, very much a nod to Michael Wesley, huge influence. Another assignment was simply to just create compositing of random images, juxtapositions of disparate images. I like taking my black and white scans and playing with those. I like the idea that you could create realistic looking scenarios. This was a little bit experimental. I would say those really weren't anything that I pursued very closely, but my neighborhood very quickly became something that I really sunk my teeth into. I had become enamored with the idea of the sidewalks, in particular sidewalks that just ended. And so I did a real formal series where I measured out, I think it was 30 feet, and I wanted to just create a set of pictures, all kind of facing this dead-end view. And it was my professor, Jenny Kula, who really brought up the metaphorical implications of that, namely that, your path in life is rarely straightforward. A lot of times you're faced with obstacles and detours, and I found that really appropriate. Moving to Wichita, I was no longer the street photographer that I had been. Portraiture is not something I do a lot of, although I think I would like to revisit this. These were just some pictures of friends that I had posed for these very frontal pictures. A Sense of Place was another assignment we were all given. I think this was a digital craft class. I did a lot in terms of straightening the perspectives on these images. There is one building in particular, it's right near where I live. It's called the Hillcrest. It's a 10-story building, and it became my muse. Just a building that I decided I'm going to spend lots of time photographing. And so I did just that. This was about 2017. So I'm into my second year and shooting large format. Never had I really messed with movements and getting the sort of rigid uprights nice and parallel. And so I found that to be a lot of fun. And I was getting more into what I would call multimedia or maybe even motion graphics. And so if I had to say I had a minor during my MFA, it would have been these motion media classes. So we got into After Effects, and one of the hardest things I did was animate this horse. It was really hard. We used Adobe Illustrator and brought those files into After Effects, creating some fun projects I felt where the marriage of typography and photography was really the focus. This was a Charles Bukowski poem that we had to, well, I chose this poem, but I can't remember. I would almost envision it more as like a lyric video. I did a real big project on breaking down a 5K. Of course, this is really sped up, but Adobe After Effects is something where I learn it and I sort of forget everything I learned 6 months later. So I need to get back into it. This was a PSA I did on hydration. And this was one of my favorite projects where it was 4 seasons. I like the sound design of this project. But getting in there with Illustrator, vectors and moving lenses kind of in through the space and After Effects, really, really complex stuff. I did some kind of one-off experiments. Here is where I had 2 4x5 sheets of film taped to an 8x10 sheet of film. I loaded all of them up into a film holder, went out and shot the scene. So you can see the 8x10, the 4x5, and then I kind of try to puzzle them all together. I did something where I had a negative that I put back into a film holder sandwiched with an unexposed sheet of film, and then I went to the location to try to get the same spot. So sort of an in-camera mashup there. I did a lot of revisiting locations. So a lot of these were 2018 and then back again 2 years later in 2020. Of course, the pandemic was going on, but this element of time back and forth, these animations, past to present, I call it with my students, definitely something I still do to this day. The gun in College Hill is a big fascination of mine. I need to get to the bottom where that started. This is a real makeshift attempt at some time lapse that I did using in a darkroom enlarger clock. Very, very sort of short-lived experiment. This was something where I pointed my 8x10 camera at my computer screen, and then I had a digital camera pointing at the back of the 8x10 camera. I messed around with LCD projectors and projecting images onto things. So yeah, an image of the 1 mile radius pointing up into some trees. And yeah, I say the 1 mile radius. I wanted to do basically my thesis project is just that, a 1 mile radius from my house. I wanted to get on top of that radius, and it was really hard. Had a friend who had access to an airplane, and we flew for a couple hours, and it was some really hard banks, really trying to get that tilt right so I could point my camera out the window. I should have just done it digitally. I was up there with my 4x5 and my 8x10, but yeah, the 1 mile radius was something I had on my home screen on my phone, and I was just sort of obsessed. I was doing lots of running, and I would kind of scout out the locations. But one thing about the classes, the photo classes, you had Photo Arts 1 all the way up to 5, and you would have lots of opportunities to kind of revisit your thesis project. So it was a lot of reshooting, re-editing, resequencing. I would make these little books to kind of show sort of the sequencing that I was envisioning. It was also a lot of fun showing this work to my students because I was having them do very similar projects. I had an opportunity to speak at something called Wichita's, and it was sort of a late stage overview of my MFA thesis project. Close to home is what I had called it. And so at this point, it really was the home stretch. I had a venue secured. Wichita City Arts is a great space in downtown. I had gotten that reserved in 2019, but the exhibition wasn't until 2021. All this work was 8x10, and so it was a real steep learning curve. Not only just learning how to process film that big, but, get it scanned, and then, of course, getting it printed. The files themselves were really massive, but I enjoyed working up in Photoshop a mock exhibition, worked really closely with John and Suzanne Maida at Lam & Pro, really just the best as far as I'm concerned. I decided on really large prints, 40 by 50 inches. I did it on medium density fiberboard, so really heavy pieces. But yeah, I had narrowed down the project to about 20 images, and part of one of the classes, which is just called thesis, was to document your process of having your show. So that's why I have this video. But yeah, real fun just working with them. One of the really lucky things in terms of timing was that we were coming off of COVID restrictions. This was March of 2021. So Wichita City Arts is a city-owned building, and they had loosened the social distancing guidelines. Of course, they needed everybody to wear a mask, but I was able to have a quote-unquote normal opening, and it was the first opening that they had had in, a year, and so I really lucked out with the timing on that. But, when I think back on just the overall experience and sort of all of the research and the writing, reading, all of the digging, it was a bear, but really, really rewarding in hindsight. Yeah, the formatting was a nightmare. The Chicago Turabian style, yeah, kind of tedious, but really good to go through it. Really good to have that experience. Really good to sort of just know what it entails writing a proper paper. Sure. But yeah, submitting the thesis, it had to be approved. And of course, at that point, you've done all the things. You've checked all the boxes. Okay, it's Friday. Day 2, consecutive day of getting here at 5:30. All right, So I got it. And I opted not to go to Savannah for the graduation ceremony. I know that's pretty lame. One of these days, I'll go. I'd like to meet up with Josh Jobert. We, of course, had lots of Zoom meetings. He was my thesis chairman, just an articulate, amazing thinker of photography. Lynn Wright was on my committee. She's amazing. Jenny Kula, my sort of original professor, unfortunately, she passed in 2023. I really think of her voice and of her guidance and of her support and really of everyone that was involved with it. So really just a great experience.
Woohoo!